You are now listening to Testimonies with Terry.
Welcome everyone to episode 7 of Testimonies with Terry. I'm your host Terry Skaggs, and thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and give the Testimonies with Terry Facebook and Instagram pages a follow for all the updates on the podcast. Today's episode is one that is close to my heart because today I'm going to be talking to my wife. You're going to hear the testimony of how a strong woman has lived her life with purposeful joy as she's dealt with a genetic medical condition that consistently tries to steal her joy. Through bouts of depression and one medical issue after the next, this woman has continued to overcome the odds and fight to see the good in all things by placing her trust in Christ. And he's continued to show up time after time after time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Abbe Skaggs' testimony. All right, guys, I am here with my amazing and lovely wife, Abbe. Abbe, thanks for coming on the show, as if you had a choice.
Thanks for having me. I'm doing this because I love you.
She is. She's a little nervous about doing this, but Abbe, I know you have an amazing story. Obviously, I know it, and I'm excited to have everyone else get to hear it as well. And this is a little bit of a different interview for me, guys, because obviously I know pretty much all of your stories. So I'm just going to try to put myself in the place of someone who maybe doesn't know you and ask you questions that I feel like any other interviewer would want to ask you.
Sounds good.
So let's start at the beginning. That's what we do on the show. We always start at the beginning. And from time to time, you might hear our dog in the background. Our dog, Blue, is laying on the couch downstairs with us here. So he just yawned. So if you hear any weird noises, it's probably from him. But yeah, Abbe, let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up? What was family life like for you?
So I grew up in Wadena, Minnesota. It's a smaller town, mainly a farming community. Not much to do unless you're into the outdoors, like hunting and fishing and four-wheeling. I grew up on a dairy farm with my 4 older sisters, who I affectionately call my 4 older moms. So total, I have 5 moms. And yeah, family life was really good growing up. I was very fortunate to have both my parents be together and present for my childhood. And I had very loving sisters that looked out for me / bossed me around.
So if you guys listened to David and Melody Joseph's testimony, you would have heard Melody say that she's also from Wadena. So Abbe, did you know Melody?
Yep. So Melody was my little next door neighbor. And by next door neighbor, I mean the girl that lived 2 miles down the gravel road from us. Her and her family were involved in 4-H and also the Assemblies of God Church in Wadena, but we mainly knew them through 4-H and showing cattle.
Gotcha. What was life in Wadena like? You mentioned that there was not a whole lot to do unless you were really into the outdoors. So were you really into the outdoors?
Yes and no. So I got to spend a lot of time growing up down in the barn with my dad and my sisters, helping out, feeding baby calves. Also was able to enjoy some hunting with my dad and my sisters, mainly with my dad, and four-wheeling. Dreamed of getting a horse, got a horse, realized it wasn't quite as what we expected it to be. He was a very tricky horse that the only time he would run was when he got out. So that didn't go very well for my dream of owning a horse as a kid.
Had a reality check pretty quick there, it sounds like.
Yep.
And Wadena also has a pretty big Amish population, Amish community up there. I know your dad would hire some of the hired help out there for help on the farm. Any cool stories that you have just having the Amish be part of your life?
So when I was in ninth grade, my dad asked to have me help out and teach some little Amish kids to go swimming at Portage Lake in Minnesota. That being said, my version of swimming lessons was to make sure that they didn't drown. It was a pretty cool experience. A lot of these kids grew up with very little as far as entertainment goes. Obviously, no TV. So yeah, this was a huge deal for them. And we loaded up probably about 9 Amish kids in our little Ford camper van. And by little, it looks like a huge creeper van. But no, it was really cool. Definitely got a lot of odd looks at the lake, but these kids had a blast. So that's probably my fondest memory of the Amish community.
Yeah, that's cool that you had the opportunity to do that for them. So Abbe, you're the youngest of 5. What was the age gap between you and your oldest sister?
I think Jessie would have been 15 years or 15 and a half years older than me. I think 15.
So you alluded to it earlier. You essentially had 5 moms. What was that like for you?
It had its ups and downs. I would say the upside of things, like each of my sisters, like taught me something along the way. Kayla was my good example of how to be funny and taught me how to cook mac and cheese, staples of our home. And Mandy was my go-to athletics girl, and I just looked up to her a lot because I wanted to be athletic like her. Unfortunately for me, it didn't turn out quite that way, but I managed to be in sports, wasn't very good. And then Coley helped teach me how to drive. She also spent a lot of time like taking me down to the creek that was on our land and really invested in me. Jessie, I really didn't get to know until I was probably like in like 3rd or 4th grade. A lot of times, like she always says that she'd get really dirty looks at volleyball games when she was holding me because people would assume that she was my mom when she was my older sister. I would get to spend a week with her, which was a lot of fun. Going to Chuck E. Cheese, buying a basketball, going swimming. So that was kind of, those summers were really cool because it was a way for me to get to know Jessie better since there was such a big age gap between us.
So then what was childhood like for you?
It was pretty good. I would describe myself as a Spitfire tomboy that didn't care for bullies. So I was known to stand up for justice in my own little way. So growing up, I would say that I had a normal childhood. And then the other sense, it was probably filled with more stressors than your average kid. I grew up with cystic fibrosis, and basically it's a genetic disease where the cells in your body don't operate as they should. So my body lacked a protein to open up some sodium channels within my cells to help basically draw water into those cells and thin mucus throughout my body.
So what are some of the symptoms that one has with cystic fibrosis?
So there's over like 1,700 different mutations of CF in itself. So symptoms can greatly vary person to person and especially even sibling to sibling. So my sister and I have the same genetics, but ours are quite a bit different. I tend to have more lung issues. So with CF, you're not able to clear out all the mucus in your body properly without doing like vest therapy and neb treatments. So I would be short of breath. Remember coughing a lot as a kid, having coughing attacks like in the middle of the class and having to excuse myself to get a drink of water. Cause like if I couldn't get it to stop, like it could go on for a good 5 minutes and it was pretty exhausting. Getting headaches from coughing so hard. And then later on, I developed some sinus issues from the mucus buildup as well. Ended up having sinus polyps removed. Just with all the mucus in the digestive system, it can cause a lot of scarring on your pancreas. So I grew up having to take artificial enzymes to help break down my food every meal as a kid. And on average, I would say I probably take 36 pills a day just for that now. Also ended up developing CF-related diabetes, also due to scarring on my pancreas when I was a freshman in college.
Wow, just a lot there. You mentioned it can vary sibling to sibling and that your sister has cystic fibrosis. Which sister has cystic fibrosis?
So my sister Kayla, who is closest to me in age, also has CF. And her symptoms tended to be more sinus-related and digestive. Fortunately, it's kind of a cool story. So when she was little, there was someone that had actually prophesied over her that they saw pink lungs, meaning that they were healthy and functioning correctly. And God definitely produced a miracle within her because she didn't have to do neb treatments for a really long time. I think she started doing neb treatments kind of just when she was struggling, probably like in her late 20s. So God's really just protected her lungs, which is awesome. And she also has CF-related diabetes as well.
And so with cystic fibrosis, is there a cure for that?
Technically, no, but thankfully the last couple of years, there's been some huge miracle drugs that have been released, and they're called cell modulators. So basically, it's giving directions for your cells to create the proteins that are lacking and also open up the protein channels that are not functioning correctly. So that has made a huge impact in my life and my sister's life. About 2 years ago, I was able to start Tricafta, and it's basically 3 pills you take for the day. It's 2 pills in the morning and 1 at night. And this drug has changed my life in such an awesome way. Growing up, I would say that my lung function was really healthy. My parents were very vigilant about staying on top of my treatments and making sure I had the best care. So I never had any hospitalizations except for when I was 2. And then again when I was a junior in college in 2011. So with Tricafta, my lungs, it's so weird, you guys. I hardly cough at all anymore, which is amazing because I would just have coughing fits that would not stop. Like my abs would hurt from coughing so hard. Yeah, you just feel very fatigued and crummy just because your body's trying to fight off all those different lung infections that are kind of brewing because that mucus is there. But thankfully with Tricafta, I don't have a crummy cough anymore. And I end up being on antibiotics way, way less.
Yeah, it's been amazing just seeing it as your husband, the changes it's made. Because, yeah, guys, we would probably take forever getting through this recording if you weren't on Tricafta, just because you did cough a lot.
Yeah.
And now you cough like a quote unquote normal person would, right? Unless you need to.
Yeah, for the most part.
Right. Then that's when you need to cough. So it's been, kind of the closest thing to a miracle drug and a cure to CF.
Yeah. So I'm able to be a little bit more lax in my treatments and therapies, which is a nice break because on average, with my nebs and my vesting therapy, it would probably take 1.5 to 2 hours to complete for the day. So I would do a morning treatment and then an evening treatment. And I've also have a little testimony within that too. So 2020, so the same year that I ended up being put on Tricafta, which sadly ended up being a sucky year for a lot of people, but for me it was amazing because I felt like I got my lungs back. I was also trying to get my hands on this new vesting therapy. And you guys, I don't know if you've ever had to deal with insurance companies, but it brings out the worst in me.
It does for everybody. Yeah.
So I had to bring the inner lioness out a couple times just to fight my case. And unfortunately, after writing a letter and stating how this would greatly impact my life, going through several appeal processes, I ended up getting denied for coverage for this new vest. And out of pocket, I believe it costs 16 grand. And I am so thankful. There was a family that had recently lost their brother due to cystic fibrosis. He ended up passing away from cancer, but that family was very gracious to me and ended up donating his vest to me. And it just happened to be right in time for Christmas. So that was so cool. Definitely got teary-eyed because it's basically like getting a brand new car, like for Christmas with no attachments. So it was amazing.
Yeah, what an awesome Christmas present. So what's the difference between the vest that they donated to you from the vest that you were using?
So my old vest like required me to sit in the same spot, be hooked up for at least a half hour. It basically looked like a emergency life jacket that like blew up. I also looked like the one chick from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory that blew up to be a blueberry. Except my vest was hot pink, but just the same, it looks so weird. My current vest, it's pretty cool. So it has 4 different pods in the front and 4 different pods in the back. And you're able to adjust the intensities of each one. And the best thing is that it's battery operated. So I can charge it and I can walk around while I'm doing my treatment. So that's been so nice.
Yeah, sounds like it's been a real game changer for you.
Yeah.
You mentioned your sister Kayla has cystic fibrosis and you guys have different symptoms of it, but what was that like growing up, knowing that you had someone who was kind of going through the same things as you and could really relate to just kind of how you were feeling?
It was very comforting. I would say that I didn't really realize just how powerful of a bond that was till later in life. So we both cope very differently. I tend to cope more verbally and just by talking about it. She doesn't do that so much, which is totally fine. We're just very different personalities. But I would say that probably like during college, we related with one another just because that's kind of when my flares were getting worse. So she was a huge source of encouragement for me and just really spoke life over me. While doctors may not have been the most encouraging, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What was that like then, going through, kind of focusing on your childhood years, dealing with cystic fibrosis?
It was hard. I remember going to sleepovers and having to like haul all my stuff with. And then if I like stepped out of the room, I felt like I was missing out on a lot of fun. And then on the flip side, if I stayed in the room, I was drawing attention to myself and I didn't want people to think that I was doing it for attention. I just didn't want to miss out on the fun. With that came like a lot of false guilt, just because I knew I was not a burden per se, but I knew that my health conditions presented challenges to my parents, like financially, time-wise too. And like, I knew that I got more attention than some of my sisters. And so that, I don't know, that just kind of was a heaviness that I had to carry at a young age. Fortunately, I didn't miss a ton of school from being sick. I would miss days here and there, but never had any hospitalizations or anything like that. I remember, like, whenever I would get a science book, I would look in the index and look up cystic fibrosis, find the page, and I'd read about it because that's just kind of what I did every year. And that was really hard for me because, like, I knew growing up that my life expectancy was different, but for whatever reason, it was more profound when you're looking at it in print. And granted, my books were probably not the most up to date, but it was still really just kind of like a hopeless, gut-wrenching feeling.
What was the life expectancy, or what is the life expectancy for someone who has cystic fibrosis?
So Obviously, it's changed dramatically over the years. I think at that time, I remember reading it, it was like mid-30s, and that was the average. That wasn't, everyone's situation. Now, I believe it's probably in the 60s, and now with the salt modulators out there, they've been giving people normal life expectancy, which is really cool.
Wow, that's amazing. So what's that like for you now as you are close to being in your mid-30s, knowing that, you don't even have to worry about hitting some type of like life expectancy number, that really the sky's the limit here for you?
It's very humbling and I'm very grateful, but it's really weird. Like the other day I was thinking about like, okay, like, am I going to have to worry about like other health issues as I get older? Like, am I going to have to worry about heart disease? Because prior to Tricafta, they could say like, eat whatever you want. And now I can't do that anymore. So it's definitely a blessing. It's just, it's kind of intimidating. I know like my sister and I kind of went through a weird phase like after starting Tricafta, just because it was such a huge change of life. Like, it's kind of overwhelming. It sounds weird. It's not like you're grieving, feeling better, but it's just so overwhelmingly different. You're just trying to process everything.
Yeah, it's almost like you're creating a new normal. For 30 some years, you lived, with symptoms of a certain kind, and then you get, this medication and even, just that new vest. And it's like, okay, we're starting to create a new normal here.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned when going over to sleepovers, you'd have to haul all of your equipment, all of your medications. And we all know kids can be cruel sometimes. Were you ever picked on or bullied because you had to take care of yourself and you had to do extra stuff to manage the cystic fibrosis symptoms?
Fortunately, I really wasn't bullied. I know that I was treated differently at times, but I wouldn't say that I was ever bullied. If anything, I was my own worst bully, just because I would deal with kind of self-hatred at times, or kind of go through the cycle of being proud of the strength of my body, and then also hating that it wasn't working the way it was designed to work. But I feel like that was just another hedge of protection that God had placed over me, just because I was dealing with so much of my own stuff that just would have been even more overwhelming and stressful as a kid.
Yeah, you mentioned self-hatred there. What did that look like?
Just a lot of anger, and a lot of the times my anger is just sadness that I don't acknowledge being sad. And just being angry at stuff that I can't change, like specifically my body and how it functions on a day-to-day basis. So I know at times it was really hard to feel feminine as well, just because it's like, okay, I may be a somewhat cute girl, but here I am having like this disgusting sounding cough. It sounds like a swamp is being passed through each cough. So that was kind of hard.
Yeah, I'm wondering, did that affect your self-esteem throughout your childhood?
Oh yeah, it did. I have very vivid memories of my childhood. Some are very good and some are just really dark, and I definitely feel like I dealt with like tormenting spirits as a kid. I remember specifically one time being in the kitchen in our old farmhouse. No one was around, and like I remember like holding a knife or a knife sharpener up against my chest, and like, I don't know, just weird stuff like that. That's not normal. That's not healthy. And like, I didn't do it. And I kind of felt like a voice like say coward. And then I would just put it back and then I'd walk away. Other times I remember going to bed at night, like crying hysterically because I thought I was going to go to hell. And fortunately, like, I was open enough with my parents to talk about this, but just that false condemnation and again, guilt. I just really let that get a hold of my little mind. And yeah, that was just tough. In high school, I definitely struggled with self-confidence. And then college, I feel like, was really, really hard that way.
Yeah, I feel like that's come up in a lot of the testimonies that I've recorded this season is, especially during the middle school and high school, self-esteem. It's really hard to navigate through that. And one thing that I'm kind of wondering too is that obviously cystic fibrosis, it sounds like it's just kind of more of an internal thing. People can't see it necessarily, but yet you feel it. And so what was that like?
I would say it was difficult in the sense that I felt misunderstood a lot. Some people might view it as like I was being flaky a lot by not showing up to stuff if I wasn't feeling well. I don't think anyone would have thought this of me, but some people might view it as like, oh, she's being lazy or she's not paying attention, when I was just feeling really overwhelmed at times as a kid. I know that I would fall asleep a lot during class just because my body was so tired. Wasn't trying to be lazy or be a bad student. And thankfully, I had teachers that knew what my situation was and were very supportive of me taking care of myself as much as I could.
So yeah, what was school like for you as you were obviously having to take care of yourself physically? How did that impact academics for you?
So I don't know if it was CF so much that affected that aspect of my life, but I just really struggled staying concentrated, especially like my younger elementary years. Just remember feeling really overwhelmed, couldn't sit still. So with a lot of my meds, they cause like rapid heart rate, feel antsy all the time. I know that I was on steroids for a period of time as well when I was little. So
what was the reason for that?
Just to help bring down the inflammation in my lungs. So my parents affectionately called it roid rage because apparently I made my parents' lives hell as a toddler, but I was a good teenager, so I made up for it.
And speaking of your parents, what role did they play in keeping you healthy? Like you said earlier, that they were really supportive and kind of almost strict with the regimen of taking care of yourself. But yeah, how do you think life would have been different if you had parents that were more nonchalant about it and maybe didn't take it as seriously as they should?
I don't think I would be here, both health-wise and obviously, like when you're struggling with your health, your mental health definitely takes a toll as well. Unfortunately, I had support on both sides of that. So my parents were very diligent, even though there was financial stressors in their life, they still made sure that we got all of our meds that we needed, that we got all the care we needed. They would drive us all the way to Fargo, North Dakota to get our checkups, which I think on a regular basis, they were like every 6 months. And that involved a lot of doctor's appointments at the same clinic. So we would see 3 pediatricians. One would specialize in pulmonology, another in gastroenterology, and ear, nose, and throat. So yeah, it ended up being long days, and I definitely view it from the perspective that my parents were making a financial investment in my life because they wanted me to stick around and be as healthy as I could be.
Yeah, and man, I just think about your mom to have 2 young girls with, this kind of rare genetic disease with no cure. And obviously your dad was in the picture and he helped tremendously, but he, he's a farmer. So he was busy a lot with that and, trying to provide financially as well. But, just your mom, just kind of how she kind of had to take on a lot of that. And man, just what a strong woman she is.
Yeah, she definitely had to balance being a mom and being a caretaker. And I feel like she rocked at both. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Abbe, you mentioned struggling with depression. I think you said at one point, even as young as 7 years old. How did you cope with that? Is it something that got better as you got older, or was it something that was always just kind of a struggle with you?
So for me, I feel like it kind of came in phases. I remember like at 7, just being really sad and just carrying a lot of false guilt, especially just with my salvation and Jesus. So my sister Kayla actually led me through the prayer of inviting Jesus to be in my heart when I was 4 years old at New Testament Church, which is a cool memory for me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, at 7, I just had a lot of lies popping up in my head that I wasn't worth Jesus dying on the cross for me, and that I really wasn't saved, and believing that I was going to go to hell, even though I had prayed the prayer of salvation several times. And at that point in my life, I remember saying it like every night, just because I was so anxious about it. Fortunately, I had a very open dialogue with my parents about what I was dealing with, and they definitely spoke life over me and encouraged me and prayed with me. My mom was also very good about kind of equipping me with truth to combat those lies by helping me memorize scripture. She would make little scripture cards. I know that she herself and my dad are very good about memorizing scripture. I can memorize scripture, but I can't tell you where I found it. But that's not the point. Like, truth is truth. It doesn't matter if you can quote it directly from the book.
Yeah. So again, going back to that support system that your parents had, but man, those are really heavy thoughts to have for anyone, let alone a 7-year-old, to be questioning your salvation, to be questioning, am I going to heaven or not? And from my perspective, to me, that just reeks of the devil trying to trip you up and get you off the path that you were on, right? Because you it sounds like you grew up in a Christian home.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the biggest thing, looking back, it's a lot easier for me to see things from a different perspective. Like, I may have just thought they were stupid thoughts, but in reality, I felt like, I don't know, just kind of the spirit of death was really heavy upon me. Just because obviously, if I was able to make it to this earth, stay healthy and living out the purpose that God had called in my life, that's going to tick Satan off pretty bad. So the grace of God was definitely over my life during that time.
Yeah. No, I think you hit it right on the head there. And I think that goes to show the power that you have and just how the enemy is scared crapless of you and tried to do whatever he could to take you out, at an early age. Yeah. And here you are, literally still kicking his butt. And I love it.
I hope so.
All right. And so then you go through high school, you get to senior year. Did you know what you wanted to do after high school?
Yeah, so I knew that I wanted to be in the medical field some way, somehow. Just growing up, going to so many doctor's appointments, I wanted to have the ability to help others, and obviously just going what I've gone through as a kid, and even up till now in this point, I have a lot of empathy for people that are going through a lot of different health conditions. And I enrolled in like a summer internship program through Tri-County Hospital in Wadena. It was like a summer internship thing. They only accepted a certain amount of kids, but basically I got paid to job shadow and help out, which was kind of nice. Actually, I don't know if I got paid, but either way, it was very, very good education as far as knowing what I wanted to do. So I got to go to quite a few different hospitals and tour different departments and different jobs. And I ended up deciding on radiology, which is really funny to this day because I was convinced that I wanted to go into nursing because at the time, Wadena wasn't super busy in the radiology department. I think I saw one CT scan and one chest x-ray. Woo! But my mom just pointed out, like, I loved human anatomy and physiology, microbiology in high school. I took some college courses at high school for those classes, and I just really loved learning about that part of the human body. And so my mom was the one that encouraged me to check into radiology more after my internship. Looked around at some colleges and stumbled upon NDSU's 4-year program and decided to go with them.
So what was that like, leaving home, going out to Fargo, about hour and a half away from home?
Yeah, so I feel like my mentality of what college was going to be like was very different from what it actually was. Some good, some bad, some meh. So I remember being dropped off and my parents going to my sister Jessie's house and with her husband and her kids. And I was alone by myself in my dorm. And looking back, I know that the purpose was so that I wouldn't miss out on campus activities for new kids. But I was like so sad and I wanted to be with my mom and my dad and my sister and my brother-in-law and the kids. So I kind of met some people through different classes that I took. I would say that there were more acquaintances than friends. I didn't really hang outside of class with them much other than to study, but nothing really recreational. And then I met some people in my dorm. I would say, so these girls, I don't know, it was very cliquey. And I didn't realize this until they decided while we were watching a movie to ignore a girl that was knocking at the door. And I knew this girl was really struggling for friends like I was. And I just got so mad. I called out the mean girls for who they were. And I said, you girls are acting like a bunch of high schoolers. And needless to say, I did not get an invite back. So that was sad. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I am very grateful for the boldness that the Holy Spirit gave me because I knew that that wasn't right. And I stood up for it. Kind of became more isolated in my dorm. Fortunately, I met one of my friends through these girls. His name was Ryan, and he was a huge blessing to me, just having a Christian friend. We'd go to Campus Crusade together and Chi Alpha. But at the same time, it was hard for me because I didn't have any like girlfriends that were really close that I could talk to. And looking back, I'm very grateful for that friendship. I just hope that there wasn't hurt on either end. Obviously, with guy-girl friendships, it can be difficult. But at the same time, a lot of good can come from it because that's how our story started out. So yeah, freshman year, I was definitely a perfectionist. Like I got straight A's in every class. I would spend probably on average like 6 to 8 hours studying for a test. So very different from your college experience. I really wish that I had your photographic memory, but I was not blessed with that gift, and that's okay. But it just made learning quite a bit harder for me. So I remember specifically writing down like a prayer request at church saying, I really want God to bless me with some Christian friends. And lo and behold, I met Whitney Liedall, and she's amazing. She poured so much into my life, but the sad thing was I didn't really get to meet her until my last semester in college. But it was really cool because it opened up a gateway to more friendships that are definitely lifetime friendships with Heather and Lindsay. So I met Heather and Lindsay through Whitney and ended up living with them my second year of college. These girls were so loving and so good to me. Can't say enough good things about them. I remember just they totally got me without, I don't know, like without me even trying. And I remember they would like write little notes to me and shove it under my door if they knew I was having a bad day. They're very understanding of the CF aspect of my life and were very encouraging and spoke life over me. And they were just there if I needed someone to cry with too. And I just love them both so much, and very grateful that God led me to Whitney and Whitney led me to them.
Yeah, it sounds like they just really loved on you.
Yeah, definitely. The first time I met Lindsay, I remember she gave me like this big hug, and I was kind of like, what's happening? Because I had just met this girl. And I would consider myself to be a hugger, but I'm a guarded hugger. Like, I won't hug people unless like I know them. And so, yeah, Lindsay broke the hug barrier down quite hard. So thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, I think that's just a cool story of God's provision, right? You prayed that prayer, and not too long afterwards, here comes Heather and Lindsay, who to this day, you're still close with.
Yeah.
And I know they're still in the Fargo area, so you don't get to get together with them as often as you would like, but what amazing women they are.
Yeah, I'm sad that we don't get to see each other more, but at the same time, when we do get together, it's like we just picked up right where we left off. So that's amazing.
Yeah. So second year of college comes and goes. What's next?
So with the X-ray program at NDSU, it's 2 years undergrad and then a 2-year internship at a hospital. And they had a number of hospitals that you'd be able to do an internship at. Each were very competitive. Like, think on average, it would be like 6, 8, or up to 14 students they would accept per year at each of these facilities. I applied in a couple different states. I applied in Iowa, and I applied in South Dakota and North Dakota and Minnesota. And just because I had poured so much into school and busted my butt as much as I could, I was able to get accepted at 4 different hospitals. So it was kind of overwhelming, but a huge blessing at the same time. I remember just kind of being confused, but obedient about where God had called me to be. I felt like he was calling me to come back to Minnesota, which I'm like, oh, this kind of sucks, because like I finally have like a solid group of friends and finally have a church that I'm connected with, and now I have to start all over again. It was just like, no. But at the same time, I would be closer to other parts of my family. So, yeah.
So then you took the opportunity that was in Minnesota. So where in Minnesota did you go to?
So I was able to get in at Centricare in St. Cloud. So I started in the fall in 2010, ended up kind of having a overwhelming first semester. It was pretty course intense, not so much clinically intense, but it eventually became that way. Ended up finding a roommate to live with that was in my X-ray class, which was helpful to have a study buddy. So even though I had connections within class and I had some friends, I still felt very alone and just kind of wanted some deeper friendships, not so much surface level friendships. I started trying to find a church that I could call home. Went to a couple different churches in St. Cloud until I met my friend Emily Conrad. At the time, she was Emily Hortzman, and she was speaking one night at Sub 30 at Joy Christian Center. And she just so happened to be speaking about healing that night. And so she prayed over me, and the rest is history. She was very involved. She's a social butterfly. I am not so much, but thankfully, her and her friend Amanda went to River of Life, and Emily invited me to come along, and that's when I kind of decided to make River of Life my home church.
Yeah, and so I look at that and I hear that, and I just think about your obedience in that situation, that if you wouldn't have followed God, what he was putting on your heart and leading you in, and you would have gone to some other state, who knows what would have happened, but you were obedient, and he blessed you with an awesome friend group and an awesome church to make your home.
Yeah. That being said, I feel like God sometimes gives us choices and he blesses it. So when I was praying about where I wanted to go to school, I felt like God had me no matter where I chose to go to school. But I kind of stepped out into a higher degree of obedience, if that makes sense, just kind of removing myself from Fargo and starting over again. And I definitely was blessed because of that, because had I not moved to St. Cloud, I would not have met you. So you and I actually met at Westwood at a Bible study, and I ended up going there because Amanda, Allen, and Emily had started going to, I think it was like a creation-based Bible study. And I remember seeing you for the first time, and I thought that you were cute, but I thought that you were kind of stuck up because you were very quiet. And turns out you were just nervous. So I ended up kind of talking on Facebook with you a little bit more. Ended up hanging out in St. Joe after we played volleyball at St. Ben's. And yeah, just kind of grew from there. And so that kind of leads to my second year of X-ray school. Second year was definitely busier. I ended up starting 2 part-time jobs while trying to maintain a social life, not having a healthy work-life balance. Ended up getting pretty sick around January. But a little bit before that, I decided to just get some help and do some inner healing, just started dealing with depression again. And that's how I met Tammy Lindell through Refuge. It was basically a free counseling service through River of Life for teens and young adults. And that's when I decided to get baptized again. I wanted to make my faith my own. Not that I hadn't done that before, but it's just another act of obedience, I kind of feel like, for myself, that God was calling me to profess my faith by being baptized again. So I did that. My parents were able to make it to that, which was really cool. And you happened to be baptized on the same day, which is also very cool.
Yeah, different church though.
Different church, but baptized the same day. And I remember on the way to church, my parents were just really concerned and asked how I was feeling. I just told them that I was really struggling with my health. Felt like my lungs were burning all the time. Ended up being on a lot of oral antibiotics that just weren't kicking those bugs that I was dealing with. And so I had scheduled an appointment with my pulmonologist down in the cities. And at this appointment, I kind of presumed that my doctor was going to want to hospitalize me. So I packed a bag, kind of expecting that this is what I needed to do for my body. Like I said, I was very fortunate. I wasn't hospitalized much as a kid. So I felt like I kind of had it coming. And I knew I was just pushing myself way too hard.
Well, yeah, you said you were working 2 part-time jobs plus going to school full-time. I mean, that's a lot.
Yep. So not wise on my part, but I was trying to provide for myself and get good work experience. And like I said, just didn't have a good grasp of what my body's limits were. When I went to my appointment, I found out that my lung function had taken a big hit. So normally my lung function, I would say, would be high 80s, mid to high 90s, depending on how I was feeling and what time of year it was. And at this appointment in January of 2011, I blew a 73. So huge decrease in lung function.
And was that the lowest that it had ever been as far as you can remember?
Yeah, I think I actually hit 71 like in 2016, but up to that point, that was the lowest I remember it being. So the plan was to be hospitalized for 2 weeks, get some antibiotics in my system via a PICC line, and basically a tune-up stay is what they would call it. And the first night I was given vancomycin through an IV antibiotic, and I just remember waking up after I had fallen asleep and I was like itching my scalp off. Like I was so itchy. So I ended up having an allergic reaction. Fortunately, it wasn't anything worse. It could have been anaphylactic. So just really itchy and uncomfortable. Then later on that week, like I was having a lot of pain near my PICC line and my arm was super swollen. And I remember like I couldn't spin my ID band around my wrist. And so they decided to do an ultrasound to make sure everything was okay. And they found out I had a 10 centimeter blood clot. So huge bummer. Ended up starting like on IV heparin. And then a little later on, I ended up waking up in the middle of the night with like severe abdominal pain. And that's when we discovered I had 6 kidney stones that were just hanging out. I also think that it was like an endometriosis flare at that time too. So I wouldn't be diagnosed with that till later. But after having a conversation with my doctor, she's like, I definitely feel like you were going through your first big flare. So just very painful abdominal pain. They first thought I had appendicitis, and it was a combination of kidney stone pain and colitis because I had developed C. diff from just being on so many different IV antibiotics. So yeah, that was just very rough time for me. I remember sitting up in the middle of the night just in so much pain, just asking God just to take it all away. But at the same time, I had so many cool prophetic words spoken over me during that time through my family and my friends. And I definitely felt a lot of love from River of Life community, especially the young adults. And that meant the world to me because only one person from my x-ray school came to visit me the whole time I was there. And I ended up being hospitalized, I think, for close to 4 weeks.
Wow. So double what the doctors had kind of planned for.
Yeah. I just remember, I think they sent in a resident to kind of explain to me that they wanted me to stay in the hospital longer just because I kept having one thing after the other happen. And I just broke down. I'm like, I cannot take this place any longer. And had hot tears running down my face, and her face was just like, what do I do? So I probably scared her a little bit, but I was just honest, like my mental health, like could not take anymore. But thankfully, through the grace of God, like I was able to get through it. My mom was amazing during this time. She spent pretty much the whole time with me at the hospital. I think she might have gone home for a couple of days to be with my dad. But yeah, she was a huge support for me. And I think the heaviness of the situation hit me when I saw my mom cry, because I rarely saw my mom cry in front of me. And I was like, oh no, this is not good. But that being said, I ended up kind of realizing that you might have more feelings for me than you had let on initially. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I had, well, I guess backing up a little bit just to kind of add to the story here. It wasn't too long before you had gotten hospitalized that you and I had met up at Caribou Coffee in St. Cloud. That was always our meetup place. And I'm not a coffee drinker, but you are.
I remember being disappointed because you didn't buy me coffee and you wouldn't let me buy you coffee. And I thought that was somehow magically going to make it a date.
Oh, the things I wish I'd have told myself back then. But yeah, we had met up and we had kind of gotten to the point in our friendship where it's just like, okay, we need to kind of like DTR, right? Like define the relationship. Mm-hmm. We either need to take the next step and make this official, or back off and just stay friends. And I remember at that point in time, I was very new in my faith and I just didn't feel like I could lead a relationship. And so I had told you that, and you were, I think, understanding and maybe on the same page as me. And we had kind of agreed to put some boundaries in place so that we didn't talk as much and
kind of work on our our own issues at the time too, because I think you were seeing Tammy for counseling as well.
Yep. And so, yeah, just kind of focusing on ourselves. And so we're just like, okay, well, we can't talk anymore, every day anymore. And then
that didn't work out very well.
That did not work out very well, because then you got hospitalized, and I wasn't freaking out because I had faith God would get you through whatever, but it's just like, I need to talk to you. I need to know how you're doing. I need to know what's going on. And so, yeah, that boundary went out the window. And there was one time where I visited you with a group of friends, and then I really wanted to see you again. And so, Jesus forgive me, I lied and said that I needed to drive down to the cities one night and pick up, I think, like a car part for my dad or something like that. And complete fib, but I just didn't want her to think that I was going down just for her, because then that would kind of go back on what we had talked about. And so, yeah, I'd come down and visited you. Your mom was there, and I think I stopped at Dairy Queen and got you a dilly bar because you said that ice cream would have sounded really good, for your stomach at the time. So I did that, and I think I stayed for like an hour and then drove back to St. Cloud.
Yep. And my mom was like, what are all these guys visiting you? She's like, you never talk about this at home. I'm like, yeah. I'm pretty sure that some of my guy friends that came to visit me alone also made up lies so that I wouldn't read into things. But obviously yours was the most genuine.
So then, Abby, you eventually get out of the hospital after 4 weeks. Like, what did it take for them to finally say, hey, you're free to go home now?
So I still went home with a PICC line, but they basically realized that staying in the hospital was not helping me anymore. So I continued to do therapy at home, vesting. I also came home with what's called like a grenade infusion. So it's basically like a pressurized ball of antibiotics that you hook up to your PICC line, and it like slowly goes in over a length of time. So I was having to get up in the middle of the night, do IV infusions, had to set an alarm so I'd wake up and do like a heparin lock to avoid any future clots in my PICC line in my veins. Ended up having to be on Lovenox to help prevent future clots. So I was just like a giant ball of black and blue, and I'm a giant ball of black and blue to begin with without being on heparin. And then I also started taking short-term insulin at this time, and that really helped me not feel so groggy. So it's kind of a lot thrown into my new routine, but thankfully I was able to at least get back to class. And then I wasn't cleared to do clinicals quite yet, so I ended up having to kind of make up for last time with clinicals later, like during spring break and other times where we had time off. But thankfully I was eventually able to pick up on my classes, even though I was horrible at doing any type of work in the hospital just because I was exhausted from all these different meds that were being infused. A lot of antibiotics have really crummy side effects, like fatigue, headache, colitis, bathroom issues. You can use your imagination there. So yeah, I was so happy that my lungs were feeling so much better, but my body was so tired. And I think I had probably lost close to like 15 pounds probably.
Man, and obviously, yeah, like you said, you were still in school at this point, so you miss a month of school. You come back and you're not fully cleared to do like your clinicals. What were your professors like? Were they understanding at all? Did they give you any type of leniency on things?
I think they, in their minds, they were understanding, especially with trying to get like my classwork caught up and get my clinicals all in. But at the same time, they had no idea what I was going through. I remember like coming out of class and my teacher making the comment, she's like, Abby, you have no butt. I'm like, yeah, no duh. Like I felt like I had went through hell and back, like That's not my concern. So I was like having people comment on my weight loss, and then they're like, oh, you look like you're feeling so much better. And in my mind, I was like, yeah, because I have a ton of cover up on. You don't see the dark circles underneath my eyes. You don't know that I got maybe like 4 hours of decent sleep last night. Like my body is exhausted and I'm just kind of done. And I remember them asking me if I wanted to continue to be an X-ray just with how demanding my health was. And in my mind, I'm like, why the heck would you even ask me that? Like, I'm here, aren't I? Like, I've put in all this work the last 3 years of my life. Like, why would I quit when I have 1 semester left? They wanted me to basically start my second year over again, or that's what they had recommended I do. And I was so mad about that because I basically felt like they were expecting me to fail at that point. I don't think they were wishing that for me, but that's kind of the vibe I was getting. And I just remember being really upset after that meeting, especially since they said, well, you didn't finish any schoolwork that we had purposely gave you early. And I get it from their perspective, like what was the point of giving me all my schoolwork if I didn't work on it? But that being said, between all my treatments and being exhausted and having people come visit me, that was the furthest thing from my mind. Like, I just assumed that they would give me grace in completing that. And they did to an extent, but the fact that they kind of put that back in my face, like, oh, it just made me so irritated, and called my mom, was in tears, explained what was going on. She's like, Abby, you're going to graduate on time and you're going to graduate with honors. And that just meant so much to me that my mom had faith in me, especially just having her there and witnessing what my day was like every day that I was in the hospital. And so that meant the world to me. And I was convinced that I was going to do that I was going to graduate on time and graduate with honors. And fortunately, by the grace of God, I was able to do that.
That's my girl.
Yeah. Yeah, I just look back and so grateful that just God's favor was upon me. I remember taking tests and like being amazed at how well that I did on them, given that I had no classroom instruction. So that meant the world to me. So yeah, it was a good feeling to be caught up and to finally graduate.
And yeah, so then you graduate, and what a big accomplishment that was. You know, I obviously for anyone to graduate college is a big deal, but for someone who every day of their lives has to do 1.5 to 2 hours of treatment and you know, still live with the symptoms on top of that, that's an amazing accomplishment, you know, especially graduating with honors. And so
yeah, I did kind of learn how to cut back working just as much as I was before, just giving my body time to heal. Ended up quitting a job at CDI as a tech assistant, and that was very beneficial for me. Basically gave me like 2 to 3 nights back each week because I would work there from so I was hired for like 2 to 3 hours a night, but with their systems that I was helping them set up and send exams to doctors to be read, I would probably be wrapping up like around 9 o'clock at night and then having to come home and do homework. So that was nice having that time back.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So then you graduate, and what does life look like for you after graduation as far as getting a job and kind of, you know, fully living that adult life?
Yeah. So during my hospitalization, I really just felt calling on my life to do ministry some way, somehow. And I had heard about Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry from a couple different friends. And I applied there shortly after I was hospitalized, ended up getting, we did like a Skype interview because Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry is based out of Redding, California. It's where Bethel Music is, Bill Johnson, Chris Valentin, Kim Walker, Jen Johnson, all the big names associated with that. And so I was convinced that I was going to be moving to Northern California and work part-time as an x-ray tech. Fortunately, God had different plans. Right after graduation, my aunt and uncle, Don and Ellen, blessed me hugely by blessing me with a 2-week trip to Alaska. And during that time, it was just a lot of fun and very healing, just to have time away, time in nature, time with my family, and just have fun, not worry about school, not worry about all the hell that I essentially went through the last 6 months. So thank you, Don and Ellen. That trip was amazing. And during that time, I kind of realized that you had other intentions for our friendship. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, obviously, as you were graduating and looking at options, for work after that, it was when you were in Alaska, and I could still text you and talk to you on the phone, but like you were really physically far away, and I'm just like, well, I don't like this. And so I, for my standard at the time, I laid it on thick. Just to kind of let you know that, I don't want to be just friends. I'd like to be more than friends. And that was really established when you were in Alaska.
Yeah. And that was kind of surprising to me, but at the same time, I always kind of knew. I think graduation night, I had invited you and maybe a couple other friends to Olive Garden. And before I left that night, you had given me a hug. And I'm like, well, this is new. I like this.
Because I'm not a hugger.
No.
Folks.
And to be fair, it was fairly awkward hug. And then when I'm just saying how it is, babe, it's all good. I'm sure I was awkward about it too, because I liked you. And then when I got home from Alaska, I was at River of Life Youth Building with Tammy. I remember you came up to me and you gave me this huge giant hug, and this was a good hug. This was not a awkward hug. And Tammy looked at me and she's like mouthing, "What was that?" I'm like, "I don't know, but I kind of like it." And that's when I got back in the swing of being a youth leader at River of Life. And I think you had started drumming at that time too. So then we got to carpool to Cold Spring every Wednesday night and basically spend like a hour worth of time in the car together and talk. So that was really cool. And shortly after that, I was looking at different positions within the area, ended up applying for a couple different jobs within Centricare, ended up getting into cardiac CT. I didn't have any on-job experience with cardiac CT, but the girls were very gracious and trained me, and I just loved finally having a big girl job. So that was very exciting for me. Ended up living with Kirby and Des St. John. They were very gracious to me when I was explaining how I didn't know where God was going to put me prior to getting the job. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to move home because all job opportunities that I'm interested in would be around this area. And Des was like, "We're not letting you leave." She's like, "Why? Like, would you ever consider living with us?" I'm like, "You would do that?" She's like, "Yeah, absolutely. Like, we wouldn't charge you rent or anything. Like, you could live in our basement and it's pretty much brand new." So that was a huge blessing.
And for those who don't know, who are Kirby and Des St. John?
So Kirby and Des St. John they were at the time youth pastors at River of Life. And Des would be Pastor Denny's daughter. So yeah, I was very grateful to have the St. John's in my life at that time. And I think it was fall retreat. You and I were planning to go, and then we kind of came up with the idea to have a date that same weekend, I think. And we went to Lion King 3D. And I remember being nervous about it because I loved you as a friend, but I was very fearful of what if the relationship doesn't work out? What if I end up hurting you? Like, I love you so much. I don't want to hurt you. So yeah, I was kind of struggling with those feelings. And then, yeah, I just realized how awesome and how cool it was to have a godly guy pursue me the way that you did. It may have been slow, but it was in God's perfect timing. And yeah, I am very blessed to have you as the amazing and loving husband that you are. And just grateful that we were able to start our relationship out as friends first and then started dating at the end of October. Ended up talking about marriage pretty early on in our dating because we wanted to be intentional. We wanted to set boundaries. And yeah, and I remember that was kind of scary for me because growing up, I didn't think any guy would really be interested in me, just given all my health issues. I kind of assumed I would be single like until my mid to late 30s, just because I was very independent and I kind of wanted to look into traveling jobs as a rad tech potentially. But yeah, God had other plans and I'm very grateful he did.
Yeah. And I remember, I think this was either at our infamous talk in January at Caribou or a different time, but you had kind of just opened up and said you were putting out all of your medications on the table. And I don't know, Abby, like on a typical day, how many medications do you have to take with cystic fibrosis?
Takes more than two hands probably to count them all. So I take 4 to 5 different inhaled nibs, couple meds for my stomach, couple meds for mental health, lots of different vitamins and supplements, just because with CF, you have to worry about nutrition because your body's not absorbing as much as it should.
Yeah, so it's a lot. And you had told me that you had all your medications out on your island and you were thinking to yourself, what guy would ever want this? What guy would ever want to put up with this? And I remember like in my mind, I was going, me, I do. I want to be that guy. But obviously didn't feel it was the time and place to tell you that. So yeah, I knew from pretty much the first day I saw you at that Bible study that, okay, yep, she's who I want to be with.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that early for you, but that's really cool. I'd say that it took me a little longer, but not too much longer. It would have been one of the Caribou dates, like when, I think this was like shortly after you had given your life to Christ, November of 2010, and just kind of filled me in on where God was taking you in your faith and that you had read the whole Bible like in a matter of months, and that like blew my mind. I remember calling my dad up that night after I got back home from Caribou, and I was like, Dad, like, I didn't have a date. I might have even called it a date because I wanted it to be a date, but I just like bragged on you and just said like how cool your story was. And yeah, so like I had hope that someone would potentially love me for me that was godly and really treasured me as a friend. So like I said, we had started dating in October, ended up getting engaged in January, and then got married in August. So a while ago, my friend Lindsay from Fargo ended up coming to visit, and she was pulling up to our house. And as she was pulling up, she just remembered all the different times that she had spoken truth over me and prayed over me in regards to my future husband, especially knowing my fears and insecurities that no man would ever want to deal with all my health issues and love me for me. And that was just a really good reminder of all the different people that were praying over me to find a godly man that would love me for me. It just kind of blows my mind that we've been married for 9 years, going on 10 years. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's gone by fast. And it's been an awesome journey with you, Abby. It's been awesome and fun and incredible. And a lot of highs and, some lows, specifically with your health. But, thankfully you're in a much better spot, especially with Tricafta. But there's also another kind of health struggle that you've had, and that is endometriosis.
Yeah, so when we first got married, we knew that there was a possibility that getting pregnant would potentially be harder. For people with cystic fibrosis, it can affect their reproductive system as well. Typically, it's men that deal with infertility more than women. So we kind of knew what we were getting ourselves into when we got married. I remember it was really important that we went through genetic testing just for my peace of mind, because obviously my life with CF has had challenges, but I'm so grateful that God has allowed me to have the family that I have and have the life that I've had. And so I just wanted to ensure that our babies wouldn't have CF, just because that would be more financial stress and more of a burden for you to carry. And in our eyes, it's like, okay, like if Terry was a carrier of CF, then we would just adopt. So in 2017, we got genetic testing done. I found out that you were not a carrier for CF. And then we had gotten the green light from my pulmonologist to start trying for a baby. So a couple of years go by, baby hasn't arrived, and I decided to go to my OB and just get some further fertility testing done. Ended up finding out that I had more issues than just hormone imbalance. Hormones checked out fine in their eyes. However, I did mention that I had gone to the ER and they had found some ovarian cysts on my CT scan. They were like, it's not really a big deal. A lot of times women have these and they go away on their own. For me, that was not the case. Ended up going to the ER a couple different times, just having severe abdominal pain. Each time I went in, I was kind of thinking that I was passing a kidney stone because it was so painful, but really it was just endometriosis pain. And for those of you that don't know what endometriosis is, it's basically a condition in which females have a lot of ovarian cysts, and these cysts emit the estrogen hormone, so it causes your whole system to kind of be out of whack. It can lead to almost like a glue-like texture on all of your pelvic and abdominal organs. And in some rare cases, it can even cause lesions on your brain and on your lungs. So think of it as basically the inner lining of your uterus being in all these little cancerous like cells throughout your abdomen. And so every time that you would cycle and have a period, these would emit estrogen and also shed, but there's no spot for your body to get rid of them. So basically it causes scarring in your body. Obviously this sounds painful, but to kind of give you a better idea of what it's like, it can be worse than kidney stone pain for me. I've had severe abdominal pain, and I think the reason why it took so long to figure out what was going on exactly, a lot of my symptoms were masked by kidney stones and just general CF abdominal pain as well. It wasn't until I was looking up stuff and learning about endometriosis on my own that I'm like, I have that symptom, I have painful periods, but at the same time, what isn't a painful period? Issues like going to the bathroom. It felt like I was passing razor blades sometimes. And so once I mentioned this to my doctor, he decided to do some more testing for me. Ended up having ultrasound, and it showed that I didn't just have one cyst. I had several cysts on my ovaries on each side, the biggest one being a 6-centimeter cyst on my left ovary. And my case was so severe that he estimated that my chances of getting pregnant were less than 5%. And I was not prepared to hear that news that day. In fact, I told you that you probably didn't want to come because I was explaining the procedure. You're like, yeah, I'm out. And I just remember just being so sad and so overwhelmed. And now I'm having my OB tell me like, hey, like if you were my daughter or my wife, I would recommend that you see this guy in New York to help with your surgery. And obviously my insurance isn't the best in the world, and I would not have any coverage for the surgery out in New York. So I just was really dealing with sadness at this point, kind of frustrated with another diagnosis. It was just one more thing. But at the same time, I had answers as to what was going on with my body. Ended up struggling with pain for a while yet. Due to my own stubbornness, like I didn't find a specialist right away. I was still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, who I wanted to see that. And there's just not a lot of endometriosis specialists out there. I was fortunate enough to come across like a support group online, and that's where I learned about Dr. Heegard at Hennepin Health. And he is a very, very sweet man, very intelligent and very skilled at doing endometriosis excision surgery. After getting a couple different tests done, he decided that having surgery would potentially improve my symptoms. And in August, I was able to get that surgery this past summer. And thankfully, the pain has greatly decreased. That being said, I still have pain, but instead of it being like an 8, I would say it's like a 4.
Yeah, and kind of backing up a little bit here, I remember when you said that you had endometriosis, like you said, you literally just sobbed and broke down, because it wasn't too long before that where you had gotten Tricafta and, finally starting to feel, okay, things are getting better, and, I'm feeling really good, and I feel like we're on the upswing here. And then you get this news that, at that time just totally crushes your dream of being a mother someday.
Yeah. I kind of went through a lot of just sadness and depression and just being angry at God, because it's like, okay, I finally get my miracle, and then another dream gets like crushed. And it's just really frustrated and very sad. At this point in time, a lot of my friends were having families of their own, and I felt like I was kind of missing out. But God has really showed me a lot during this past 2 years, specifically just how a lot of times I had been placing like fertility or baby almost like as an idol in my life. And so God just really did some reshaping and revamping of my heart, and just being grateful for what I have. Like, I know when I had spoke with you before, I just said, like, I feel like a part of our family is missing. And it was really hard for me to be open with you about that, because I knew that it would be hurtful to you. And obviously I did not mean for that to come across that way, but I was just being honest and saying, hey, like, I feel like our family's not complete. Like, I'm very grateful for all that God has given us, especially you, and blessing us with our little fur baby Blue. But it was definitely a thing that I had to continually put on the altar day after day after day. I'd say that it's a lot more in check compared to what it was prior to my surgery. I don't know if that's because I'm feeling better and my hormones are better balanced. I basically went through medically induced menopause, and I was a blubbery mess, and I'm so thankful that you didn't leave me, because I know I was not a kind person and dealing with a lot of pain and anger and all the other things that come up with fertility or infertility. And so thanks for sticking it out with me, babe. I know it hasn't been easy on you either.
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy for anyone to go through, but I'm hopeful, right? You had the surgery, you're a couple months out, and we're not pregnant yet, but we're hopeful that someday soon we will be. And if not, like you said, there's always adoption, and I definitely feel like God will continue to grow our family in His perfect timing.
Yeah, and for me, just feeling better, I'm amazed at how much light has been shed on how blessed I am. Like, I knew that before, but it's so much easier to see things for what they truly are when you're not in pain. Pain can distort so many different thoughts, and yeah, pain sucks, like in more ways than one, just because if you're not grounded and your heart's not in the right spot, it can really lead to bitterness and anger and isolation. Yeah, I've always grown up with the relationship with God that it's okay to be angry at God as long as you are with him in that anger, as long as you don't push him away. And I just think of David too. Like, David kept it real. Like, when he was having a bad day, he would tell Jesus or God that he was having a really rough day. But there was always like a refrain in the Psalms. Like, it didn't end on a crummy note. It ended on truth. Like, you've been a good dad. You've provided for me all this time. Even when my enemies are like at my heels, I know you're with me. Yeah. And I just love that a broken man like David, who had so many mistakes and so many tragedies in his life, would always come back to God and tell what was going on inside of him.
Yeah, and David's referred to as a warrior a lot, and you are a warrior, Abbe, and it's not necessarily because of you, but because of the Holy Spirit in you, right? Like, God at work in you, and just your continued faith and reliance on him to get you through everything. I mean, look at what we all covered here, during this last hour and a half, cystic fibrosis, endometriosis, hospitalizations, doubts about, are you going to find a husband, self-esteem issues, all that stuff. And here you are. Mm-hmm. And again, the tagline of the show is glorify God, kick Satan's butt. And you're kind of the poster woman for that, in my opinion. Abbe, what do you think life would look like if you didn't have that relationship with Christ?
Life would be way, way harder. And to be honest, just with all my bouts of depression and sadness, if I didn't have Jesus and the loving support of my friends and family, I know I wouldn't be here. Like I said, I had several suicidal thoughts throughout my life, and fortunately, God spoke truth over me after I had those thoughts, and friends and family spoke truth into my life as well. And yeah, I would be an even hotter mess if it weren't for Jesus in my life. And he's the hope that I cling to, and so happy and so blessed with where he's taken my life. And he has erased all limits that this world and doctors have spoken over my life too.
Amen. That's such a cool word. Abbe, last question. What advice would you give to someone listening to this who maybe they have cystic fibrosis, maybe they just have some other type of chronic health condition that leaves them just feeling kind of crummy and in pain on a daily basis? What advice would you give them?
There's strength in vulnerability. And I know it's really hard for people with chronic illness and chronic health conditions to be vulnerable, just because so often we have to put a front up that everything's okay. Like, when someone's asking you, oh, how are you feeling? 9 times out of 10, we usually fib and we say, I'm okay, or I'm fine, I'm good. When on the inside, like, we can be going through a really tough season with our health and our mental health as well. And yeah, be vulnerable with close friends and trusting family members, and find ways to combat the lies with scripture. I truly believe in the power of positivity and speaking life over yourself. One thing that I'm very grateful for is growing up, my parents never even spoke about the life expectancy for us. And that was always encouraging for me, because it didn't put limits on our life and limits to the things we could do. I would encourage others to not put limits on what God can do with your life, given the limits that this world has placed on you and your body. Just place your hope in him. Like, I can't imagine going through my life without my hope in Jesus. And like I said, I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that. And it's okay to be angry. Don't stay angry. It's okay to feel weak, because in your weakness, he is strong. Even though your body is not a picture of health and it's not God's original plan for you to go through all this pain, he's going to use it to glorify him.
That's so good. So good. Well, Abbe, I love you. And I'm, again, just excited that people get to hear your story and get a better understanding of what you've gone through, what you go through, but more importantly, the hope and the faith that you have in Christ through it all. So thanks a lot for coming on and sharing your testimony.
Yeah. Love you very, very much.
Well, like I said at the beginning, I know Abbe's testimony. I've heard it many times throughout the years, and I've been alongside her as she continues to forge new testimonies. But doing this interview was really a great reminder for me to realize how blessed I am for being married to Abbe. Seeing her choose joy through everything she goes through helps me want to do the same. She motivates me, she inspires me, she's a hero to me. And I hope you all can find motivation and inspiration to keep pushing through whatever struggles you're going through after listening to Abbe's testimony. If you have any questions for Abbe, use the hashtag AskTWT across the TWT social media pages, or send a message to the TWT social media pages, or email it to twterrypod@gmail.com. That's it for this week's podcast. I'll be back next week with the final testimony of Season 1. And as always, remember to live your life in such a way that glorifies God and kicks Satan's butt.